nations, especially at a time when science and technology was making the world so small. It took Brigham Young and his followers 188 days to go from winter quarters, Nebraska, to the valley of the Great Salt Lake. It takes 30 minutes for a missile to go from one continent to another. We did not seek to become a world power. This position was thrust upon us by events, but we became one just the same, and I'm proud that we did. I can well understand the attraction of those earlier days. Each one of us has moments of longing for the past, but 2 world wars have clearly shown us, try as we may, that we cannot turn our back on the world outside. If we do, we jeopardize our economic well-being, we jeopardize our political stability, we jeopardize our physical safety. To turn away now is to abandon the world to those whose ambition it is to destroy a free society. To yield these burdens up after having carried them for more than 20 years is to surrender the freedom of our country inevitably. For without the United States, the chances of freedom surviving, let alone prevailing around the globe, are non-existent. Americans have come a long way in accepting in a short time the necessity of world involvement, but the strain of this involvement remains, and we find it all over the country. And I see it in the letters that come to my desk every day. We find ourselves entangled with apparently unanswerable problems in unpronounceable places. We discover that our enemy in one decade is our ally the next. We find ourselves committed to governments whose actions we cannot often approve, assisting societies with principles very different from our own. The burdens of maintaining an immense military establishment with 1 million Americans serving outside our frontiers, of financing a far-flung program of development assistance, of conducting a complex and baffling diplomacy, all weigh heavily upon us and cause some to counsel retreat. The world is full of contradiction and confusion, and our policy seems to have lost the black and white clarity of simpler times when we remembered the Maine and went to war. It is little wonder then, in this confusion, we look back to the old days with nostalgia. It is little wonder that there is a desire in the country to go back to the time when our nation lived alone. It is little wonder that we increasingly want an end to entangling alliances, an end to helping all foreign countries, a cessation of diplomatic relations with countries whose states or principles we dislike, that we get the United Nations out of the United States and the United States out of the United Nations, and that we retreat to our own hemisphere or even within our own boundaries to take refuge behind a wall of force. This is an understandable effort to recover an old feeling of simplicity. Yet in world affairs, as in all other aspects of our lives, the days of the quiet past are gone forever. Science and technology are irreversible. We cannot return to the day of the sailing schooner or the covered wagon, even if we wished. And if this nation is to survive and succeed in the real world of today, we must acknowledge the realities of the world. And it is those realities that I mention now. We must first of all recognize that we cannot remake the world simply by our own command. When we cannot even bring all of our own people into full citizenship without acts of violence, we can understand how much harder it is to control events beyond our borders. Every nation has its own traditions, its own values, its own aspirations. Our assistance from time to time can help other nations preserve their independence and advance their growth, but we cannot remake them in our own image. We cannot enact their laws, nor can we operate their governments or dictate our policies. And second, we must recognize that every nation determines its policies in terms of its own interests. No nation, George Washington wrote, is to be trusted farther than it is bound by its own interests, and no prudent statesman or politician will depart from it. National interest is more powerful than ideology, and the recent developments within the communist empire show this very clearly. Friendship, as Palmerston said, may rise or wane, but interests endure. The United States has rightly determined in the years since 1945, under 3 different administrations, that our interest, our national security, the interest of the United States of America, is best served by preserving and protecting a world of diversity in which no one power or no one combination of powers can threaten the security of the United States. The reason that we moved so far into the world was our fear that at the end of the war, and particularly when China became communist, that Japan and Germany would collapse, and these 2 countries, which had so long served as a barrier to the Soviet advance and the Russian advance before that, would open up a wave of conquest of all of Europe and all of Asia. And then, the balance of power turning against us, we would finally be isolated and ultimately destroyed. That is what we've been engaged in for 18 years, to prevent that happening, to prevent any one monolithic power having sufficient force to destroy the United States. For that reason, we support the alliances in Latin America. For that reason, we support NATO to protect the security of Western Europe. For that reason, we joined CETO to protect the security of Asia, so that neither Russia nor China could control Europe and Asia, and if they could not control Europe and Asia, then our security was assured. This is what we've been involved in doing. And however dangerous and hazardous it may be, and however close it may take us to the brink on occasions, which it has, and however tired we may get of our involvements with these governments which are so far away, we have one simple central theme of American foreign policy, which all of us must recognize because it is a policy which we must continue to follow, and that is to support the independence of nations so that one bloc cannot gain sufficient power to finally overcome us. There's no mistaking the vital interest of the United States in what goes on around the world. And therefore, accepting what George Washington said here, I realize that what George Washington said about no entangling alliances has been ended by science and technology and danger. And third, we must recognize that foreign policy in the modern world does not lend itself to easy, simple, black and white solutions. If we were to have diplomatic relations only with those countries whose principles we approved of, we would have relations with very few countries in a very short time. If we were to withdraw our assistance from all governments who are run differently from our own, we would relinquish half the world immediately to our adversary. If we were to treat foreign policy as merely a medium for delivering self-righteous sermons to supposedly inferior people, we would give up all thought of world influence or world leadership. For the purpose of foreign policy is not to provide an outlet for our own sentiments of hope or indignation. It is to shape real events in a real world. We cannot adopt a policy which says that if something